Meanwhile, closer to home, I wanted to share this with you. This is from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem stating that I am in direct coordination with our federal intelligence and law enforcement partners as we continue to closely monitor and thwart any potential threats to the homeland. To speak more on this, I do want to bring in Chuck Marino, who is a former DHS senior advisor, to talk more on the threats that DHS is closely continuing to follow. And Chuck, we appreciate you joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Good to be with you.
So I did want to start off with an investigation underway right now in the United States out of Austin, Texas, as the FBI is looking into a shooting that happened at a bar over the weekend as a potential terror attack. And the suspect in that attack, and I'm going to bring that up for our viewers right now, was wearing a shirt that could indicate possible ties to Iran. And I did want to share that with our viewers right here. This is what they provided. This is a still image of the suspect saying property of Allah. And then underneath, they were stating that there was a T-shirt there as well. As we continue to watch all of the developments and the retaliation continue to unfold after the initial strike of Operation Epic Fury, here at home, what is DHS really closely taking a look at?
Well, there's a lot going on at DHS and over at the Department of Justice with the FBI and other law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And that is that within the United States, we have been infiltrated over the last administration under the Biden administration for allowing over 180 different countries into the United States, many times being unvetted. And the other dynamic of this is that you may have those that are in the country legally, to include American citizens as well, that may be susceptible to becoming radicalized on this Islamic radical ideology and may align themselves with countries like Iran.
And Chuck, let's talk about two separate entities of this topic. We're talking about the potential for sleeper cells, but there's also the concern for lone wolf attacks. Can you differentiate the two for our viewers and kind of share with us what those concerns for both of those are?
Yeah, I think right now the concern with organized groups, including, the possibility of terrorist cells, is that they've entered the United States and have been lying dormant until they become activated. This can be a cell, for example, comprised of Hezbollah, which, as you know, is one of the proxies of Iran. And could become active and act independently amongst each other, which makes it very hard for law enforcement to detect. And then you've got these lone wolf actors, which potentially this actor in Austin, Texas, could have been, that really don't communicate with many others, if anyone at all, and then decide to go out and take that action against American citizens. And those are also equally hard to detect. So law enforcement certainly has their work cut out for them in both of these cases. And it makes the landscape here within the United States very complex. I would say that our threat level is certainly at a minimum elevated right now, which is why the statement that you read from Secretary Noem at DHS is not surprising and also very important.
And no doubt DHS and other law enforcement agencies are always closely monitoring any potential threat, but that level has been heightened. What are the communications happening right now, and what can you share with us in terms of the strategies and methods that are now being implemented to thwart any such threat?
Well, I think based on the totality of some of the things that I've spoken about, the operating assumption from law enforcement at all levels, federal, state, and local, is that the country has been infiltrated and that the threats are already here inside our borders. And I think that's the correct operating assumption. I think we've seen previous examples of how that has jeopardized the Homeland Security of the country. And so going forward, these law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies are already operating at that elevated level. There are other steps that the Department of Homeland Security could take with respect to the American public, and that is if they were to formally raise the threat level here in the country to elevated under the National Terrorism Advisory System. This is the system that replaced the old color-coded threat level system here in the United States. I was part of the small team that oversaw the implementation of that new program, and it's designed to communicate as much as possible with the American people so that they can become involved in their overall safety and security, and also become a force multiplier for these law enforcement and intelligence agencies, utilizing the concept of the program, see something, say something, by reporting anything that may look out of the ordinary.
And I did want to share this. This is with our Fox 7 Austin team, just to encapsulate the ongoing investigation into the shooting that happened over the weekend. 3 people, including the gunman, were killed and 14 others were wounded in a mass shooting outside a bar in Austin's bustling 6th Street Entertainment District early Sunday morning that authorities said may have ties to terrorism. And Chuck, as we continue to take a look at this, I did want to ask you, because this is maybe perhaps a more traditional attack in which there is an actual person going out in public and committing an act of terror. But now we've seen the landscape of terror change. We've seen, cyber attacks, the use of artificial intelligence. As these attacks and terror attacks continue to evolve, how has the strategies with DHS and other agencies also evolved to monitor any potential threats on those levels?
Well, they're certainly paying attention in the area of cyber. Iran, for example, and its proxies are known to try and leverage cyber attacks against the United States. You've got the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, which falls under the Department of Homeland Security, also working with the Secret Service and FBI, who are both expert agencies in cyber investigations, as well as critical infrastructure, such as our water systems, electrical grids. These are all susceptible to becoming victims of a terrorist attack. We always say that if you want to, hit the United States or any other country, the first place that an adversary would seek to exploit and damage would be the power and the water supply to a country. That would immediately impact the American public as well as anybody's population. So these things have to be protected. Many of them now are obviously controlled by cyber. And so a cyber attack would be certainly the easiest way for an adversary to attempt to take these systems down. And we've got to make sure that these are impenetrable.
You were talking about the DHS always monitoring any potential threats, and that means, monitoring physical activity or perhaps activity online, the physical footprint and also the digital footprint. How does one monitor to thwart a cyber attack? What are the strategies that are implemented in that respect?
Well, these are going on not just in a time of crisis, but on a daily basis. And so the majority of critical infrastructure is run by the private sector. It's not run by the government or by states and cities. So as a result, DHS and the Department of Justice are continually working with these private sector entities that run, for example, the electrical grids to make sure that there's that constant communication, that constant sharing of best practices when it comes to protecting the cyber infrastructure, for example. And any anomalies are reported immediately. Some legislation has been changed in the past to force this mechanism to make sure that reporting is done in a timely manner if any of these anomalies are detected, so that federal authorities could come in and assist these private entities with resolving and further preventing any cause for concern from taking down these vital resources.
Let's also talk about the human aspect. And you were talking about, the psychological profiles when something of this sort were to happen. There's now a vacuum of power. Iran's supreme leader has been killed along with 40 top leaders. And this creates a vacuum. When we talk about terrorist organizations with this chaos, does that typically embolden them to go out and commit acts immediately? What is the psychological profile that law enforcement agencies, DHS, is taking a look at this particular moment in time?
Well, they don't know what the trigger may have been put in place by a place like Iran and its proxies to take action. It may have been exactly what we see carrying out right now. It could have been military attack, decapitating leadership to then go out and take action. So I think law enforcement takes into account the possibility that, look, should the United States have taken action and been successful, as we have been, at eliminating the leadership there, although it's not complete yet, you still have the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, for example, still refusing to surrender, still going in the direction and following through in their loyalty to the Ayatollah Khomeini. And so, the triggering event could very well have already taken place. So what is going on? This is what keeps law enforcement up at night, keeps them concerned. And as I said, it's why you're seeing federal, state, and local agencies already shifting to that elevated threat level, regardless of DHS coming out and formally doing so. I think the last administrative step, if you will, is to now pull the American people up to that same level, because we want to make sure that the American people also are paying attention to what's going on here and the ramifications here in the country. And one of those ramifications, by the way, is that, radicalization used to take place by somebody having to jump on a plane and traveling to a special interest location or going online and following, a terrorist organization and their ideologies. Well, now it can take place here in the United States. We have such a large immigration population, in many cases illegally, unfortunately, under the Biden administration, that these communities have segregated themselves from the rest of American society. And as a result, they are not assimilating to the culture here in America, the norms in America, the laws of America. And radicalization becomes much easier now in many of our major cities.
Chuck, before we let you go, is there any particular aspect as we take a look at the days, weeks, and even months to come that you're taking a very close eye on from the perspective as having been with the DHS?
Well, I can tell you that when I recommend that DHS raise the threat level to elevated, they are able to do so in increments. I would say that the minimum that they should do is 60 days. Raise the threat level for 60 days, reassess based on what's going on, because there's no sign that the military action is going to wane here until we, and along with Israel and our other allies, achieve the degrading of those that still remain within Iran that are loyal to the supreme leader who was killed in the attacks, along with other senior leadership. So there is the potential that this gets worse before it gets better, and I think that principle needs to apply to here at home as well. And so we need to be prepared. The American public needs to be prepared. As I said earlier, needs to be involved in their own security and needs to report anything for law enforcement. An agency like the FBI is not going to be able to do all this on their own. No agency can. So the public's going to play a pivotal role in helping to keep the homeland safe. And unfortunately, we're behind the curve right now with the threats from around the world that were allowed to come in to the United States under the previous administration. And that puts us at a significant disadvantage.
And Chuck, when you mentioned raising the threat level, what specifically does that mean in terms of changing in behavior, changing in operations and strategy from the perspective of the government?
Well, there are a lot of forcing mechanisms that come along with increasing that threat level. It forces many federal, state, and local and military agencies to adapt, I would say, more stringent protective measures across their enterprises. And again, it also pulls the American people up to a higher level. You know, many of these state and local agencies, many private sector companies have now aligned their own internal risk management, crisis management programs to be aligned with the National Terrorism Advisory System. And that is, if there is a change in this, and there's two levels under this system, there's elevated and there's imminent. Imminent being you've got specific, credible intelligence that an attack is certain within the near future. And then their internal security protocols will then go into effect. So the National Terrorism Advisory System essentially turns into a triggering event for those in the private sector, those at state and local levels, to take additional steps to safeguard themselves, maybe critical infrastructure in their communities. And so everybody is in a much better place because they're now aligned with this system.
All right, Chuck Marino, a former DHS senior advisor, we appreciate you joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks, Stephanie.